vibe, baby.
Welcome to the Cup of Joe Show, where we explore the journey of recovery from alcohol and drug addiction. One story, one conversation, and one step at a time. I'm your host, Joe, creating a safe space for honest discussions about the challenges and triumphs of addiction and alcoholism. In each episode, we'll hear inspiring stories and uncover tools that make healing possible. Sobriety is not a one-size-fits-all journey, and you don't have to face it alone. Recovery is possible, and it's worth it. Thank you for joining the Cup of Joe Show. Now let's get started.
Hey everybody, welcome back to the Cup of Joe Show. I'm your host, of course, Joe, and today I'm very excited to have my friend Scott T. Scott has been sober since May 30th, 1998. He's been married for more than 40 years, and together he and his wife have 5 children and 9 grandchildren, plus 2 four-legged family members, Otto the Rottweiler and Franny the cat. A lifelong lover of travel, music, history, and reading, Scott is also an accomplished chef and cookbook author. He's written 7 cookbooks, set 3 world records for omelets, which is pretty cool, and has been featured in major publications like the LA Times, Boston Globe, and New York Times. He even hosted his own TV show in upstate New York called CNY Flavor. And he also appeared on Fox and Friends several times representing the restaurant industry. Through it all, Scott says the greatest gift has been sobriety and the grace to keep learning, growing, and remaining teachable. So grab a cup of coffee, settle in, and let's get into it. How you doing today, Scott?
Doing great, Joe. How are you?
I'm doing well. I have to tell real quick, we have a retreat here in Tennessee, the Easy Does It men's retreat. And Scott was scheduled to speak for 3 years in a row, and for different reasons, wasn't able to do it the last 2 years and was able to do it this year. So I've been wanting to hear Scott's story for 3 years, and this year I wasn't able to attend the retreat. So I said I have to get Scott on the show so I could personally hear his story. So thank you for your willingness to share your story, Scott.
Thank you, Joe.
So what was it like growing up, Scott?
Well, growing up, I grew up in Boston, city of Quincy, actually just south of Boston there. And, growing up in the early 60s, it was a great time. I have fond memories, playing, just happy. I had a good childhood, good morals, good values that were taught to me. Didn't understand alcoholism per se. One of the things the 12-step program talks about, a book that I read, is The Alcoholics, the Tornado Roaring Through the Lives of Others. Talks about the warped lives of blameless wives and children, the sweet relationships that get deadened. And sometimes I talk about separation, the conscious separation that we get, because in the beginning, you're talking early childhood. I mean, I had a lot of love and laughter and hope and faith, and I wasn't separated from that power. And then through alcoholism, my dad being the alcoholic, I didn't understand the behaviors and the fighting between my mom and dad, and bruises on my mom, the police coming to my house, things like that and stuff. And so I started separating myself from that power. One of the things that we deal with is some of the human characteristics of the selfishness, self-centered, self-seeking behaviors. I started developing those traits before I even picked up my first drink. The drinking age was 18 in Massachusetts. And, my story is not the story of drinking out of a brown paper bag at the age of 5, but being the drinking age 18, I started drinking really, really young, and honestly, I hear people say sometimes they grew 6 feet tall, they could dance and talk to women and stuff. Mine was I could just breathe because I believed I was in a world I didn't belong, and if you just leave me alone, everything's going to be okay. One day I'm going to do this, and one day I'm going to do that, and that separation, sometimes it's like, and we all hear it growing up in this world of gimme, 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 take, 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 first come, first serve. Early bird gets the worm. If I don't do it, someone else is going to do it. I got to get mine, right? I started developing those characteristics. And then once I put alcohol into my system, it just ignited it. And I started making a lot of poor choices. That's just the bottom line. I started making a lot of poor choices.
When do you remember the first time you felt the effects of alcohol, Scott?
I do. My mom and dad were having a card game. Card games were big back in the '60s, and the neighbors would come over and they'd play cards, and they had all the booze on the kitchen table, and everybody had Tupperware, those big tall Tupperware glasses, and my older brother and I poured a bunch of whiskey and vodka and all those things into the cup and snuck it into the room, and started drinking it, and I mean I remember it going down. I remember it coming back up when I threw up everywhere, and um, you're trying to hide that from your parents and stuff. And one of the things that I don't share about this too, but one of the things I did at that point was I knew that I liked it so much. My brother and I snuck a few beers out of the refrigerator and hid them out in the backyard, and went back in, and then naturally we got caught and the vomiting and stuff. And I remember the very first time that I drank. Yes.
Yeah, that the sneaking it's amazing how early we start doing that.
Yeah.
I did similar things. It was like when I first got exposed to it, I was like, now I got to hide it.
Yep.
It's like an instinct.
I think
It's like an instinct.
I think it is because that naturally the next morning we were grounded, and we were sitting out back, and my older brother was sick as a dog, and I opened a beer because we had him hidden out there, and he asked me what was I doing. How could I drink that? And it's like I couldn't wait to do it again. And so very first time I'm hiding it, and I'm grounded, and I'm drinking. And that was to set the pattern up for some time to come.
So looking back, I mean, I guess that's a good, probably a early warning sign that maybe there's a possibility for addiction. Was there other signs like that, Scott, when you were growing up?
Yeah. I had a lot of misconceptions back in the '60s. I remember waking up, and my mom and a couple of my brothers were in the kitchen, and they were crying. My mom's crying and stuff. And the long and short of it is in a blackout, my dad had hit and killed a woman. And how do you process that as a young kid? Your hero, and and this happens and stuff. And he got sentenced to AA. That was part of his deal, and he went to AA, and yet he still drank, still did Darvon and Librium. These are some of the old drugs, and so I had these misconceptions on what AA was. I went to Al-Anon with my mom, and back then in New England there were no men in Al-Anon, so it was just a bunch of women that complained about their living conditions and how they were being treated. And my dad, being the alcoholic, would sit down the street in his van drinking, and then follow us home and beat my mom up and call her a whore, and who was she meeting there, and what was she doing telling his business on the streets. And she wasn't doing any of that. She was just trying to find a way to raise 4 boys in a home with alcoholism. And after I started drinking, And, I'm a blackout drinker right from the beginning. Blackouts when you can't quite remember everything you've done. And I had an arrest. I was just turned 13 years old, and I had an arrest for assault and battery on a police officer and drunken disorderly conduct. And it's funny because I come from a family of law enforcement. I have uncles that are police, cousins, everything, and I got an authority complex, and I love it because years later, when I finally pulled my head out of my butt and got sober, defiance is one of our chief characteristics. When you try to tell me what to do, I tend to rebel. If you're a teacher, babysitter, police officer, and so I was a rebel right from the beginning, and I got sentenced to AA from the court and to the young people's group in Quincy, Massachusetts. And I'm 13 years old. The second edition is still being used. One of the founders of Alcoholics Anonymous, Bill Wilson, had just died. And the youngest young person was like 33, and I'm this kid, and you got to be there because the court's telling you. And I can't relate to any of these guys. They're talking about losing cars, homes, families, going to jail, and I'd never done any of that. And I loved it because there's different customs all over the country. And one of the customs in New England there, you raise your hand at one of these meetings, the old timers would come up and actually interview you. They would talk to you and interview you to make sure you belong there. And that's what happened to me. A bunch of the old timers came up at the end of the meeting and started questioning me. And when I say the old timers, I'm talking about the guys with like 30 days and 60 days, the guys that really knew the program. Their sponsor said, go talk to this kid. And they came over to talk to me, and they basically precluded me from AA. They said that I was more of the juvenile delinquent type, and that if I could learn to deal with my anger, I might be okay. And I love it because one of the things, and I know this is a recovery podcast, and we'll talk about, drugs and all that other stuff, but I'm in AA at this time as a young man, and the misconceptions that I had about drug addiction and alcoholism, thinking they're separate issues, thinking that, if I just don't drink, I'll be okay. And, how do you tell your mom or the probation officer that, they're telling you you're doing so good, you haven't drank in a couple weeks, and you got a job at McDonald's, and you're doing so good. How do you tell them that I'm frigging going crazy inside my head and I want to drink? I just, drinking's my solution. Drinking's not my problem. Drinking's my solution so I can deal with you and I can deal with them. And, sometimes I talk about it's almost like someone snuck into my bedroom in the middle of the night, and they just put the spring inside me, and every day it just got a little bit tighter and a little bit tighter, and until all of a sudden, you piss me off, or she does, or the boss does, whatever, and I get drunk, and I don't understand that I'm in an absolute fight for my life. I don't understand what differentiates me from normal people. That allergy of the body, coupled with the obsession of the mind, the phenomenon of craving that develops in us. I didn't know any of these things. And naturally, I'm not reading the book. I'm not going to read the book, and I'm not going to get a sponsor, and because I'm different and I'm unique. And I love it because I'm actually living the big book of Alcoholics Anonymous when it talks about how we act in chapter 3, more about alcoholism, how many of us will pursue this into the gates of insanity or death. I'm on this road and I don't even know I'm on this road. And so I had to go because of the court and stuff, but I never did any of the work, never read the book. And I call it a vicious cycle. So all through the 70s, mid 70s, I'm a detox at 14, Skid Row at 16, eating out of dumpsters and trash cans. I'm starting to make the rounds to the homes of the bewildered, as my friend Jim Buckley would talk about, and getting strapped to beds, getting pumped full of lithium, thorazine, chloral hydrate, Haldol, getting diagnosed suicidal, homicidal, manic depressive, all these wonderful titles. And really, honestly, what it is I'm misdiagnosed. What I am is I'm an alcoholic, okay? And all those behaviors of mine are common manifestations of alcoholism and drug addiction. That's what they are. And I didn't know this because I'm not being told this. I'm just, honestly being told, just don't drink and go to meetings, and the meeting makers make it, and that information is killing me. One of the magics of whether, I don't care if it's Narcotics Anonymous or Cocaine Anonymous, Alcoholics Anonymous, it's the one alcoholic talking to another alcoholic, one drug addict talking to another drug addict. No lectures to endure, no axes to grind, and I never had that happen to me. Bill Wilson, one of the founders, used to talk about the cave of alcoholism, and in that cave, the warped lives of blameless wives and children. It's the car accidents. It's the rehabs, the losing your wife, your girlfriend, whatever. And the alcoholic, we're in that cave. I was in the cave, and the priest would come to the mouth of the cave, and my mom would, and the probation officer, and my guys, Scotty, come on out, come on out. And they don't understand. I really want to come out. I just don't know how to come out. And see, they don't know how to come in and get me. And the magic of Alcoholics Anonymous and the 12-step programs, the person that gets properly armed with the facts, about themselves, not the drug addiction or alcoholism as a whole, but they get properly armed because they've done the work, they've gone through the process. They can come in the cave and they can take me by the hand and say, Scotty, come on out. This is what we do. This is how we recover from this seemingly hopeless state of mind and body. That had never happened to me. When I talk about customs, it's funny because my very first sponsor, I was 16 years old, and how it worked back then in Boston. Let's say, Joe, you're my sponsor, and I'm going to take a 4-year anniversary medallion tonight. You would get up as my sponsor and tell the group about me, the step I've taken this year. I like that this year, right? My community involvement, the things I'm doing, the things I'm trying to become. And then I would get up and accept it. And this guy, Fred, he was like 33. He was one of the youngest guys in the group. He's getting his 4-year anniversary medallion. I'll never forget it because he got up, his sponsor said all this wonderful stuff, and I'm listening, and I'm looking at this guy, and he held the medallion in his hand, and he goes, I was really nervous this morning when I woke up because I knew I was going to have to get up here in front of all you people, so I smoked a joint to take the edge off, right? And everybody clapped at the end, and I got to tell you, I love what he had to say. So that meeting got over, and I went right up to him and asked him to be my sponsor. Right? That was my first experience with sponsorship in Alcoholics Anonymous. Now, years later, when I read the book myself, this Dr. Silkworth, he's a great benefactor of AA, but he said that we can't take alcohol in any form, okay? And the only treatment we have to offer is complete abstinence. And that any form can be marijuana, rock cocaine, heroin, whatever your trip is. That's not sobriety, okay? And I didn't know that. And I thought that was okay. And so when I talk about misconceptions, it's really important finding the person that's been through the process, that can take you through the process, that has done the work. None of us like doing it. It says that specifically. None of us like a leveling of our pride, the confession of the shortcomings or sins, if you please, that the process requires. But I gotta get the stuff out of me because what's in me is like gangrene. And I know that if I don't get it out, it's going to kill me. But I don't tell anybody that because the type of neighborhood I grew up in is you don't share your feelings and your emotions. If you do, you're weak. And if you're weak, people are going to take advantage of you. My friend Sean Mulcairn used to say the type of neighborhood we grew up in is that if you had a heart condition, you wouldn't go out and tell your friends because they'd punch you in the chest just to see how bad it was, right? So you didn't share these things. You just kept them inside. And that's what I did is I kept everything inside. One of the things about the programs and stuff in recovery is we only become as sick as our secrets. And I had a lot of secrets, okay? And I didn't know it. I didn't know there was a better way being, even in the program, even in recovery. Because, I went to NA too, and they didn't even have a basic text. They used the big book of AA and a little white book. And, being a drug and alcohol rehab's the type that shave your head, made you wear dunce caps, sit on the bench, and clean dumpsters with toothbrushes, the tough love trying to break you down. That didn't work. scared straight program. You go into these big penitentiaries and these tough convicts, give me your shoes. I'm going to bend you over when I get you in here, right? Trying to scare you. The problem is you can't scare a real alcoholic. You can't scare us, right? And so, I just kept that vicious cycle going. And our souls get really dark, they get really dark. And I don't know if you have any questions for me now or you want me to keep going.
Wait, you're doing just fine without me, Scott.
Well, I ended up getting this girl pregnant. And what did you do back then? We called them shotgun weddings, basically. Is you got married and you moved down the street, you got a job in a factory, and that's what I did. I quit high school in my senior year. In February of my senior year, I was due to graduate, and I quit, and I got married, and it lasted 2 weeks, and she was home with her family, and I was in this little dingy apartment, and I found myself with my buddies, and we were in the combat zone, which is a red light district in Boston, back in the 70s. And my buddies and I, we were rolling prostitutes. And if you don't know what that is, it's robbing them. And I ended up getting arrested for armed robbery. I was an adult now, I was 18. And I went into the Charles Street jail, the oldest jail in New England. And it's, 5 tiers. And I walked in like that Richard Pryor and Gene Wilder movie, Stir Crazy. That's right, we bad. And guy got thrown off the 5th tier and he got killed. And it scared me to death because I had heard all the things that happen to cute little punks when they get you in there. And I was cute. I had long hair and everything. I was worried about what was going to happen. Massachusetts is a Commonwealth law state. And so how that works basically is you have the right to face your accuser. If they don't show up 3 times in court, they dismiss it, lack of prosecution. And it's pretty hard to find street people, and I went to court and they didn't show up. I got bailed out. And this is where my soul became really dark because I knew I was doomed. The big book has wonderful terminology with the English language about how we're basically screwed, okay? And I knew I was going to drink again. I knew I was doomed. And I ended up going to my little dingy apartment and drank a bunch of beer and smoked some weed. And I got in a bathtub and I cut my wrists. I cut them all the way down and tried to kill myself. And I came to 5 days later on the critical list, and the shame, guilt, remorse that I had from that, I couldn't even do that right. And just so very, very lonely. They say that addiction is a disease of loneliness, and I'm very, very alone. And I ended up beating that case, and you think that would be a time for celebration, but it wasn't because I knew I was going to continue on. And so I tried to kill myself again. I took a bunch of sleeping pills and stuck my head in the gas stove, and naturally that didn't work. And I found myself strapped to the bed one more time out at Medfield State Hospital, and this woman came to see me, and she told me about this guy named Jesus Christ, okay, that if I accepted him as my personal savior, behold, everything would be new. And I grew up Irish and Catholic, and my God was a punishing God that kept a record of everything I did wrong, and I was going to be cast in a lake of fire. And here she is telling me about this forgiving, loving God. And alcoholics of our drug addicts of our extreme, we go from one extreme to the next, and we're either really good or really bad. And I liked what she was offering, and so I accepted this, and I went into this program called Teen Challenge. And I quit swearing, smoking, watching TV, listening to rock and roll. Started going to Bible study 7 hours a day, church 7 days a week. I entered the ministry. I was going to become a preacher. I started traveling New England, giving my testimony how Christ has saved my life. I became what you call a Bible thumper. And, 3 months into this the way the steps work, and they're universal 12 steps, whatever program you're in. But the way the program that I was in, from the doctor's opinion to page 63 really deals with a couple things in their conclusions of my mind. That I'm alcoholic, that my life's unmanageable. I accept that to the innermost self. Unmanageability simply means not achieving one's purpose. And I knew I wasn't achieving my purpose. Came to believe that. Doesn't say came to believe in a power. It says came to believe that a power could restore me to sanity. Being around AA, I thought it talked about the sanity of the world, when in actuality, it was talking about the insanity of the first drink. When my mind convinces my mind to get loaded again, knowing I just got in a car accident, I just got out of rehab, I just got a restraining order put against me, whatever the moment is, my mind will convince my mind to get loaded. I didn't know that the steps were designed. There's an old saying, uncover, discover, and discard all these things. And that by the time we get up to the 10th step, sanity will have returned. And sanity is simply a form of sound judgment. And so in the second step, I'm believing that this power can, help me to not take that first drink, okay? Fix, pill, whatever it is, that I don't have to get loaded. And then making the decision to turn my will and my life, our third step, right? My will and my life over to the care of this power, this God. My will and my life is nothing but my thoughts and my actions. And so I'm in this program, and I that those first two steps are really conclusions of my mind. They're not workable steps. They're conclusions that from my experience, from my story, I know, and I conclude in my mind that I got a problem. I don't want to live like this anymore. What do I got to do to change? And then that third step I had done because I had made that decision, and I had gotten to the action and try to change that thought pattern. But what I had never done was a fearless and thorough moral inventory of myself, let alone admit that stuff to anybody. Because I said earlier, I'm not going to admit this stuff to nobody. I keep everything inside. And I woke up, 3 months into this program. Let me tell you, too, that, the book says we're actors, right? We can be more demanding, more gracious, whichever the case is. And I'm an actor. I'm trying to fit in. And I got to tell you, these Christians, they had something in their eyes, something in their eyes that I wanted. And I liken it today to some of these old timers that you meet that are in the programs. They got that shit-eating grin. You don't quite know what it is that they got, but you want it, right? And these Christians had it. And I'm going into these revivals, the Pentecostals, born-again Christians, and they're talking in tongues and passing out and stuff. And I'm not getting it. I'm not getting filled with the Spirit. I'm not talking in tongues. And I'm 3 months into this program now, and I wanted it so bad. And so I'm an actor. And so I decide at the next revival, that I'm going to do what they do. If you want what we want, do what we do, right? And so they're getting filled with the Spirit and they're falling out. And so I decide, okay, I'm going to get filled with the Spirit and I'm going to fall out. And that's what I do. I get filled with, and boom, I fall out. And oh my God, I'm hurting my back and my neck. It hurt, right? You see, it's a real experience for them. Okay, they're really having a real spiritual experience. I'm not. I'm acting, okay, trying to fit. And so, bam, I'm hitting the concrete and something. Oh, it hurt. Oh, and it's like, now I can't tell them it hurt though, right? Because then they know I'm making it up. And so, in my mind, it's like, I'm not going to do that anymore, right? I'm a quick study. I'm not going to do that anymore. What I'm going to do is I'm going to talk in tongues. And so, the next one, I get filled with the Spirit and I start making this up. And I call this my throne of judgment, because I start making it up. And Joe starts interpreting what the Spirit's telling him that I'm saying. So I know he's full of crap because I'm full of crap, right? And now in my mind, this whole thing's full of crap. Now, I don't say these things, but now I'm thinking, because I'm a thinker, right? And now, oh my God, this is all full of crap. And so I wake up. We call them moments of clarity, okay? And I woke up in this program 3 months into the program, and that moment of clarity was, Scotty, you're still full of crap, right? That was my moment of clarity. You're still full of crap. And like I said, the stuff inside me was like gangrene, okay? And like your show here is called the Cup of Joe, right? And I have a cup of coffee right here. I drink it black, okay? I drink it black. And if I took this cup right now, and I put it underneath the sink and I drip cool water into it, right? At the end of this show, when we're done talking, if I look in the cup, it's still going to be dark and dirty and mucky and cloudy, right? It's not going to be clear, cool water. What the fourth and fifth step are designed to do is, this is me full of crap, and then I dump it, boom. And now maybe I can retain some of that cool, clear water, and it'll be beautiful. I can retain the message, the hope that you're trying to give me, the message of hope, that promise of the freedom of the bondage of self, and I can retain it. But see, I'm trying to put this good stuff into me, but inside I'm full of crap, and I hadn't dumped it. And that was my moment, like, of clarity when I woke up. And I went to the director of the program, and now he's a non-alcoholic, non-drug addict. And I went to him and I said, I got this stuff I got to get out. And oh my God, we got into a spiritual battle. We started quoting scripture to each other, and it was literally a scriptural battle. Don't you believe you have the strength to face all conditions through the power of Christ Jesus? Don't you believe that? And now we're going back and forth, right? And I told him what he could do with his program. And I walked away. Remember, defiance, one of our chief characteristics. The forward in the 12 and 12, it says that the 12 steps are a set of principles that are spiritual in nature, that if I practice them as a way of life, it's going to expel the obsession and leave me, the sufferer, usefully and happily whole. And I'm not usefully and happily whole. Okay. And that defiance came back, and I told him what he could do, and I walked away from the program. And I had that misconception about AA still. Right? I had never been told smoking weed is not okay. And so I decided I know I'm an alcoholic. I'm not going to do I'm not going to drink. I'm just going to smoke some weed. And you know what happened? I just smoked some weed, and then you get that cotton mouth, and a beer passes in front of you. And, our book says that we can't bring to sufficient force the pain, the misery of a week or a month ago. Okay. And we take that drink, and then the drink takes a drink, and the drink takes the man. And one more time, I'm off and running, wondering how the hell this happened. And I know you have singleness of purpose and primary purpose in the programs, whether it's Narcotics Anonymous or CA or AA, but they're all intertwined. Even the big book of AA talks about gin and sedatives. And what's gin and sedatives? Well, that's drugs and alcohol, right? Because I'm a garbage pail, the magic elixir. You're going to give me stuff so I can drink more or drink less or whatever. I'm going to try to find that balance so that I can continue to drink. Okay. The baseline is that I have that allergy in my body coupled with the obsession of mine and the phenomenon of craving. And once I start, my friend Paul always says destination unknown, because I'm going to do anything. I'm going to do heroin. I'm going to smoke rock cocaine, whatever it is, I'm going to do it. And that's what happened once again. And all of a sudden, and I'll fast forward here because we'll run out of time with my story, but I find myself November 14th, 1979, sitting on this bridge called the Bourne Bridge in Cape Cod, Massachusetts, and 169 feet up in the air, and so very, very alone. I'm just flawed, ashamed, defective, unlovable, all these things. Nothing works for me. AA, none of it works for me. Psychiatry, none of it works. Medications, and I just, I call it self-absorption. I got me on me, and I can't get me off of me. And I'm sitting on this bridge, and it was a big drama. The state police blocked the bridge off. Corps of Engineer and Coast Guard were down in the canal with spotlights on me. The Good Samaritan Suicide Prevention League talked to me on bullhorns, trying to talk me down. And I'm very delusional, and thinking about how the West was won, or Dillinger, I would have been a great gangster, right? All these things, the woulda, coulda, shouldas, turn left when I turn right. Full of resentment, Latin word, base word, resentare, refeel, rethink, replay. And that's what I'm doing in my mind. All the woulda, coulda, shouldas, and, focusing on bad things, not good things, not, I joke sometimes, being a Boy Scout, being trustworthy, loyal, helpful, friendly, courteous, kind, obedient, cheerful, thrifty, brave, clean, and reverent. I remember that good stuff. But I'm on the bridge thinking, wow, I saved this kid's life. I got honored by the House of Representatives. I got a plaque, and I'm thinking my dad was drunk and he didn't show up. That's what I'm thinking on the bridge, not the good stuff. I'm thinking about my dad being drunk and not showing up. I'm thinking about getting caught coming home from school, from sneaking out the night before. My dad grabbed me and marches me to my room, and there's a lock on the outside of the door. And he has a milk jug with the top cut off, and he hands me the milk jug, puts me in the room, and locks the door from the outside. And I find the light and I turn it on, and he had taken my whole window and sheet metaled and riveted it, and he would let me out in the morning to go to school and lock me in at night, right? Now, I'm thinking those things. Now, I got to tell you, I didn't think that was child abuse at the time. I honestly didn't. Still don't the way I was raised. That was just the price for getting caught. Okay, that was the price that I had to pay because I got caught. Okay, I should have been slicker, right? And it's like, and I had, like I said, uncles, cousins that were police officers. They knew what was going on too. It wasn't child abuse, and it was a different time. I know it is today, but back then it wasn't. It was a different time, a different, decade. And so, I'm on the bridge thinking all these things, and underneath is this campground called the Bourne Scenic Park, and all the campers came out and they set up lawn chairs and stuff. And they're yelling at me, "Jump, you mother, jump," right? And I'm looking down at these guys going, "Man, these guys are crazy. Don't they know if I jump, I'll die," right? I'm thinking. And so I tell this story to really show the cunning, baffling, and powerfulness of alcoholism. Because the insidiousness of it, because I was up there 4.5 hours and I decided to get down. And this is where it took over because I had another thought. I had an honest thought. And the thought that jumped into my mind was, you know what, Scotty, if you get down, you're going to look like a pussy to all these people that have waited all this time for you to jump. You got to jump. That's what my head told me. And so I turned and I jumped. Okay. I don't remember hitting. They say I died. They say I was dead for almost 13 and a half minutes. The only bone I broke was my sternum bone and my chest cavity. And that was from them giving me the pericardial thumbs, bringing me back to life. There's a whole backstory behind that and out-of-body experience and all this. But I want to tell you 2 quick stories from that. So maybe 25 years ago, I was given a talk in Middleborough, Massachusetts, about 20 miles from this bridge. And my mom was there. She's since passed. I had 2 of my brothers there. They've since passed, but I had sister-in-laws. There, a lot of family there. And I gave this talk and I told that story and told the story about the people down below yelling, "Jump." And the meeting got over, and this guy comes busting through the crowd. And this is him, not me. He goes, "Oh, I owe you an amends. I owe you an amends." And I looked at this guy. I said, "Dude, I don't even know you." He goes, "No, you wouldn't." He goes, "We were at the bar in Toby." He goes, "And I came across a scanner that they had a jumper." He goes, "So we rolled some weed, got some Jack Daniels." He goes, "And that was me yelling at you to jump." He goes, "And you did," right? And he had like 10 years sober. Now, I'm looking at my mom going, "See, I wasn't imagining it," right? Because people, a lot of our stories are hearsay, or if you're married, they're hearsay, right? Because we're blackout drinkers and we got to piece this stuff together. And I never had that corroborated. And I'm like, "See, Mom, I wasn't making it up," because I knew I heard that, right? So that was cool. And I don't know, 20 years ago, I was giving a talk out in Palm Springs, and I told that story, and that meeting got over, and this guy comes through. He's a real distinguished suit and tie. He says, "I always wondered what happened to you." And I looked at him. I said, "I'm sorry, sir. I don't know you." He goes, "No, you wouldn't." He goes, "I was the captain of the state police barracks in Buzzards Bay." He goes, "I called out all the rescue vehicles for you." He goes, "I was a practicing alcoholic at the time. I got like 25 years sober now." And I'm like, you joke, is that odd or is that God? Little things, that happen in our lives. And, coincidence is simply when God chooses to remain anonymous, all these things. But it's like, I wasn't done. Even after that bridge, I wasn't done. And long story short, I went into the Army. I figured I'd lied about everything out of Pennsylvania. I'd go into the Army. My Army career wasn't even 6 months. I had 4 Article 15s. I was on the Benninghouse program of alcoholism, taking antabuse every morning in front of the CO. And, the long and short of that, by the end of that career, I was strapped to the bed in Martin Army Hospital, Ward B4, psychiatric ward, getting pumped full of all these drugs. And they ended up giving me a Chapter 5 honorable discharge, unfit for military life, and kicked me out of the service. And So what am I going to do now? It's a disaster in Massachusetts. My Army career, I was such a failure. I'm going to go to California, land a golden opportunity, Hollywood, Beverly Hills. I'm going to go get discovered, right? I'm going to be in a rock and roll band. I'm going to be in the movies, right? All this stuff. I got out there. I was out there 6 days, and I came out of a blackout, and I was in L.A. County Jail. And I heard a saying real quick, and that's that you come on vacation and you leave on probation, right? The only problem was they weren't letting me go. And, I ended up between the three of them, I got sentenced to 22 years in the state penitentiary in California. This is when there were only 11 institutions in California. I think now there's 80 something, but there were only 11 at the time. Jerry Brown, Governor Brown, he dated Linda Ronstadt back in the day. He was the governor. And, those of you that have been in jails and prisons know it's nothing but a human kennel that breeds violence. And I let it breathe the violence in me. I became an absolute animal. I got tattoos all over me. All the things that you hear happen in there happen. I made it up to this institution called Tehachapi. And I got invited to a meeting of Alcoholics Anonymous. I had been in AA 10 years at this time. And it's like, oh, okay, let me try this. And I went into AA and I sat in the back. And it was done by Southern California H&I Hospital and Institution. And they started that meeting and they introduced a panel member, one of them, and his name was Eddie Miracle. And I'm a little cynical AA guy, right? Oh, that's a cute AA name, Eddie Miracle, but that was his real name. And he started out and he said, if you're new, you've come home. You need never be alone again. You're like the prodigal son who had to venture out there. Now you're home. He started talking that this is a disease of perception, of our glasses being half empty or half full. He said, we're all children of God. For me to love you for your color, you not for your color, that there's no room for hypocrites in the program of Alcoholics Anonymous. Either we're all God's kids or none of us are. What was my choice to be? And he started talking a lot about his sponsor, a guy named Chuck Chamberlain. And I believe luck and chance was passing me by. It was the first time in AA, and understand this, it was the first time that I heard chapter 5 from the big book being read, or chapter 3 more about alcoholism, that many of us would pursue this into the gates of insanity or death. They're talking about me. And then they ended the meeting with a vision for you, where it talks about our book being meant to be suggestive only. We realize we know only a little. And I'm sitting there going, oh, this is so good. Where are they getting this? And my fundamental belief now is if you want to hide something from the alcoholic, put it in the book, right? They'll never find it because they never read it, right? I've been in AA 10 years, never read it. And so I jumped in AA like my life depended on it, because it did. I went back to school. I got my GED, 4 years of college. I grew as a gentleman, a gentleman. I stopped affiliating. Became a sober member of AA. My sponsor was Eddie Miracle. My grand sponsor was Chuck C. I never got to meet Chuck because he died when I was in prison. But I worked all 12 steps. I had that spiritual experience or awakening as the result of the steps. And I got divorced when I was in there. I met another young woman. That's a whole other story. It's really trippy. And I was told I didn't owe myself a weekend with her. When I got out, I owed myself a meeting, and that's what I did. I went to the Rafters in Newhall, California. Very first day out. Second day, I was at an AA dance. The third day, I was at a San Fernando breakfast meeting in California, and then the Pacoima group, and this big guy with a big beard was standing at the podium, and he bangs the podium, and he says, "The elevator to sobriety is broke. You must use the steps," right? And I'm thinking, this guy's crazy. They called him Crazy Ted, right? He later became my sponsor. That's another story, but if I get to it. And then that Monday, I was in a panel in Acton rehab, and that's how I started my walk in sobriety. And all the promises came true. The freedom of financial, economic, and security would leave, a new freedom, a new happiness, all that stuff. And I started businesses, and I got married, and I started having kids, and I joined that rock and roll band I always wanted to join. I became a lead singer of a couple different bands, and built a custom home on Cape Cod and bought a house in Valencia and had 13 cars, was making more money you could shake a stick at. I flying between LA and Boston 4 or 5 times a month, getting picked up by limousines, chauffeured wherever I wanted. I mean, this program where it really works after making 20 cents an hour for years, and now I'm living the dream, and um, my story's not a story of an happily ever after, though, because we work the steps in order, but we can give them back in order too. What I mean by that is, my sponsor died. I had long-term sobriety. I didn't get another sponsor. I, was speaking all over, for lack of a better term. They give you the mantle of circuit speaker, and I'm traveling all over speaking, telling you what you could become if you were honest and willing enough to try it. Um, and I carry this message, the message of hope, the promise of the freedom of the bondage itself. Well, all of a sudden, I'm not carrying that message. I'm carrying the message of look at me, look at where I came from, look at where I am now. Me, 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 me. And I gave that step away. Step 11, where we become seekers, sought through prayer and meditation to improve the conscious contact with the power, with God, right? I'm not doing that anymore. I distinctly remember 5 years sober, I stopped getting on my knees. I used to get on my knees every morning and every night. I stopped getting on my knees. I forgot the lesson of what was taught to me as humility, where we don't crawl before any man except for God, but we don't step on him either. And that humility that we gain from getting on our knees and getting on in the morning and at night, I forgot that, because you can talk to God in the shower, you can talk to him in the car, and that's true. You can. Okay, but I stopped getting on my knees and I stopped becoming a seeker. Our 10th step, where we, continue to take personal inventory when we're wrong, promptly admitted it, and I owe you an amends, right? And I'd be at a meeting, Sean, I owe you an amends. And Sean would say, hey, thanks, Scott. And then I'd walk away and I'd say, I owe you one. I'm not going to give you one. I call that mental masturbation, because, see, now I'm starting what I call practicing a program of hypocrisy. Getting up, professing a belief in a system and a way out that brings us back from the gates of insanity and death, and walking out the door doing something totally different, right? And again, we become as sick as our secrets, 8 and 9, owing amends, and, steps 6 and 7, the character defects, the shortcomings, they're back and forth. And, I'm forgetting the way it's designed, where it says that step 6, that's a step that separates the men from the boys, the men being the perfect objective, which is of God, and then my objective. They're 2 short paragraphs in our program, in our book, and they're the 2 least understood steps in the whole program, dealing with the 7 deadly sins and the character defect that we deal with for a lifetime as they crop up, and I'm not dealing with them, okay? And now the stuff inside me again, the secrets, and we become as sick as our secrets. And I back myself up right to the 3rd step, where it talks about, uses the word continue, that the rest of my program depends upon this step and continue, and how I continue. And I'm not doing it. Okay. God is nowhere. My friend Lou Adler said to me, Scotty, it's pretty hard for one God to recognize another God, and how true that is. And the insanity returned. Okay. And I drank. I didn't drink and then get insane. And I want you to understand that it's the insanity return through, the basic human instincts, sexual instincts, social instincts, security instincts. They're all good. They're all God-given. But we tend to miss the mark because it's not the right flavor, or the might not, or, the right this or the right that. And the compromises that we make, and the insanity returned, and I drank. And I turned my back on everything, on AA, NA, all of it, my family, and in short order, I lost everything. That's just the truth. I had several restaurants in LA, and, my wife looked at me and, said that our relationship is so damaged that God can't even fix it. And we were going through a bitter divorce. I was down to 129 pounds. That's 150 pounds less than I am right now. I couldn't stop drinking. I know what it's like to want to stop drinking and can't stop drinking. that physical allergy coupled with that obsession of the mind. And I'd go into meetings and people, well-meaning, well-intentioned people, you done now? You got enough arrows in your ass now? And, can I be your sponsor? Oh, that would get me, and, I'd walk out the door and get loaded. I remember, I don't know why this just popped into my head, but I remember when the very first night I drank, I was at a men's stag the next morning, and my friend Matt came up to me. I'd spilled coffee all over me, and he looked at me. He goes, "You drank?" And I go, "I did." He goes, "You smoke any weed?" And I go, "No." He goes, "You do any heroin?" I go, "No, Matt." He goes, "Did you freebase?" That's what it was back in the day, freebase before rock. And I go, "No, Matt." He goes, "Damn, and you're back already?" And he walked away, right? And when he walked away, I thought, he's right. I got to raise my hand as a newcomer again. I got to freaking that ego. I got to, I deserve that. And so now Matt and I have since talked since then, many times. We don't say that to newcomers anymore because, see, I'm looking for that in my head, and that caused me to go out and do all those things: heroin, rock, cocaine, everything. Okay, you name it, I did it. And I was down to that 129 pounds, looking out the window for the bush people because, they were out there. And the long and short of that whole thing, it was such a disaster. I lost everything. I lost absolutely everything. Pitiful, incomprehensible demoralization. I'm standing across from one of my restaurants, one of them, and I'm sucked up. It's raining, and I'm hungry. I got no money, and I'm hoping that the busboy or the dishwasher will bring over a biscuit and gravy or some hash browns so I can get something to eat. You talk about, in Bill's story, he says one who had thought so highly of himself, right? And that confidence began to be replaced by cocksuredness. And next thing you know, he was loaded. And that's what happened to me. I was never going to drink again. I was never going to do drugs again, ever. Okay, I was one of the ones that would say that I'm never going to get it. If I get loaded again, yeah, it would kill me. If you get loaded, you're going to die. Right. Well, I'm here to tell you might not die. You might have to live through that pitiful, incomprehensible demoralization again and again, because Christmas night, 1996, I took a 25 automatic and I shot myself in the head. I just wanted it to stop. I just wanted it to stop. And I came to a few days later on full life support systems at the Antelope Valley Medical Center. And I joke a lot, but because I got a sense of humor. My wife doesn't think I got a sense of humor, but I do. and I joke and I say, this is where my story gets a little weird, okay? Because the state of California stepped in and they charged me with ex-felon with a gun, okay? And for shooting myself. And back in the day, remember when I first was in trouble, they had what was called the bitch. It was a habitual criminal act. Okay. Now, I never hurt anybody. I never did. I never hurt anybody. I was just a stupid drunk robber and stuff, right? But I never hurt anybody. Well, because of the felonies, though, and now I'm an ex-felon with a gun, they had a 3-strike law. And they ruled that this was going to be a 3rd strike. It was actually going to be a 4th strike they were going to give me. They were going to strike me out. And so I go into court. And we're actors, right? I need rehab. And I try to play that game. And I tell the judge I need help. He goes, "You sure do." And he remanded me into custody. So the long and short, next thing you know, I'm in Chino State Prison. And they're going to give me 25 to life. Okay. And my thought was, I had that honest thought again. And my thought was, I want to be sober now. I'll work the steps now. I'll get a sponsor now. No, please. Right. We become spiritual real quick when we go into those places. And my case is no different, but if you've ever read that other big book, and Daniel in the Lion's Den, or Peter sitting there, the light coming and the jail gate opening up. That's my story. On October 7th, 1997, this judge pulled me out of state prison. That relationship that was so damaged, that bitter divorce that we were going through, that woman started a letter campaign. Okay. And people all over the country and the world wrote letters to this judge. And he pulled me out of state prison and he said, I don't understand this. You seem to have helped a lot of people. How could you do this to yourself? And I want you to understand, he didn't understand alcoholism. He didn't understand how, we can build this pretty picture up to our bosses, the judge, the probation, our wives, whatever, the boss, at this time, please give me another chance. And we're such good con artists, we get them to give us another chance, and then we get loaded and we tear the house down, right? He didn't understand any of that. But I believe God touched him, because what he did was he struck two of my strikes, and he released me the next day. And he released me with a 5-year tail, okay? And the long and short is, I jumped out, and I jumped in AA like my very life depended on it, not thinking I was ever going to work the relationship out with my wife or my children, never thinking I was going to get anything back. Never. I just didn't want to drink anymore. I wanted to have a primary purpose again. I wanted to help the alcoholic and drug addict to achieve sobriety. It was no longer a question of what would Scotty be, what would I have me be, but really what God would have me be. To go where he wants me to go and say what he wants me to say, and let that ego and arrogance just, go to the back burner, and to become a servant. And that's one of the things. You can come in AA, NA, and all this a big shot, and hopefully you work yourself up to servant, okay? Because that's the highest rank we've got in these programs, is being a servant and trying to help others. And once again, all the things came true for me. I didn't get everything back, but I worked it out with my wife and my family, and I still had a few restaurants, and it's like God is good. God is good, and I did a lot for you. I worked the steps again. I made the amends. I had to do the work. And it's been a rocket ride the last 28 years, and I've got to travel all over this country and out of the country, and I've been very blessed to one of the funny ones. Yeah, you'll like this. I was in Egypt, and I was given a talk on God as you understand God, and I'm at the Swedish embassy in Cairo. And there's only 11 people there, 11 alcoholics, okay, only 11. And I hear all this ruckus going on and clapping and stuff. And I says, what's that? And they said, oh, you can look. And I go over to this wall, and I get a chair, and I look over, and it's all this glass, like panels. And there's got to be 175, 200 people in there. And they're clapping, and they're having a good. I said, what is that? And they go, oh, that's NA. I go, that's NA? And they go, yeah. And I go, is that like a conference going on over there? They go, no, it's like that every week, right? And I go, what? And they go, well, this is an Arab Muslim country, and alcohol is forbidden in the Quran. So everybody's a drug addict, right? Because you can go into the pharmacy and get whatever you want. Everybody's a drug addict. He looked at me, he goes, but that we're real alcoholics here, right? Because there are only 11 of them. I just thought that was hilarious. But, gave a talk on my 5th anniversary at the Vatican at St. Paul's, okay? Led a meeting at Congress, right? And I know Congress isn't that popular these days, but my wife and I were invited to dine with from the Speaker of the House. We were guests of the Speaker of the House, and in the private dining underneath the Capitol, right? All those things are good. Yeah, I mean, those are fun, right? Conventions and stuff. But see, I go into the jails, and I go into the rehabs, and I go into the rescue missions and stuff. And, I know there's probably a lot of women listening to this, and I like to tell a couple quick stories. But one was about a woman, and she was 85 years old, and I was in Fredericksburg, Virginia, and she was getting a 30-year anniversary medallion, and she talked about what it was like growing up in the South. And they had a woman they called Mammy, and she was a big black woman, and all the kids in the neighborhood would go and sit on Mammy's lap. And she remembers sitting on Mammy's lap at 5 years old, and she was rubbing Mammy's skin, and Mammy looked down at her and said, child, my skin is as dark as the night, but my soul is as white as snow, just like yours, right? She's a little 5-year-old girl and runs away. 50 years later, in the grips of alcoholism and drug addiction, she wakes up to what we call the hideous four horsemen: the terror, the bewilderment, the frustration, and the despair. And that's when we're coming out of it. That's not when we're in it. And she looked at her skin and she remembered Mammy. Okay. And she had that surrender. And in that moment, she cried out to God. She said, my God, my skin is as white as the snow, but my soul is as dark as the night. Help me, Father. And he did. She was getting 30 years. And what is that surrender? You hear in these programs all the time, you got to hit your bottom. You got to hit your bottom. What the hell's a bottom? Right? My mind will go, well, I didn't kill him. Well, this didn't happen. And this Dr. Thibault wrote what happens to us as alcoholic and drug addicts. It's what we do is surrender. And what that is our egos get deflated just enough so that we can experience a psychic change. Our more religious members call that a spiritual experience or a spiritual awakening. But what happens is we surrender at depth. We have that psychic change sufficient enough for us to recover. And it's the ego getting reduced. He said the problem, though, is that we have such a tremendous capacity for resurgence, our ego, that we gotta work on that. And that's the purpose of the rest of the steps, is to get that ego reduction, to get that so that we don't have to get loaded again. One more quick story. I was in Akron, which was the birthplace of Alcoholics Anonymous, and I was with this old timer. And I've been very fortunate to meet a lot of the old timers that started these programs. And I was with Art Hoffman. He started the Kenmore group with Bill Dotson, AA number 3. And I was with Art, big guy, 6'4", and we're talking AA and stuff and history. And he looked at me and goes, how long you been around, kid? And I said, well, I got 4 years sober. He goes, no, how long you been around? And I go, oh, about 34 years. And he started laughing, right? He goes, come here. And he takes me over this table, and this old guy's sitting there. He goes, this is Steve. He had 25 years. He drank, right? So, oh, my God, I know how that feels, right? And I start talking to him, and he held up his hand to me. He goes, kid, he goes, I decided I didn't need you people. I didn't have to come to meetings anymore. I had 25 years, he goes, and I drank. Now, Art's standing next to me, and he elbows me. He goes, ask him what he learned. Ask him what he learned. I said, sir, can I ask you what you learned? He goes, I learned not to take the first drink. Right? Isn't that what we learn? I'm serious here. Isn't that really what we got to learn? Yeah, we can all pontificate and tell wonderful stories, and we all got stories, and my story is no better than yours. We have the anonymity, but we got unanimity in AA, meaning none of us are better than anybody else. But what do we learn? We got to learn not to take that first drink, no matter what. And I know I'm a little over time here, but I wanted to tell you I was in 1982. I'm in a cell, and I picked up this track, and little did I know that it was a poem that used to be on the tables in Cleveland, Ohio, back in the 40s and 50s. But it was written by an anonymous writer, and it just hit me between the eyes. And what it said, basically, see, Dr. Bob, he was one of our co-founders, believed that the eyes were the windows to the soul, and that I can BS you and you can BS me, okay, but I really can't BS myself. And he talked about the mirror being the looking glass, okay, and looking at ourselves in that mirror. And this poem simply said that when you get what you want in your struggle for self, and the world makes you king for a day, just go to a mirror and look at yourself and see what that man has to say. For it isn't your father or mother or wife whose judgment upon you must pass. The fellow whose verdict that counts most in your life is the one staring back from the glass. He's a fellow to please, never mind all the rest, for he's with you clear up to the end. And you pass your most dangerous, difficult test if the man on the glass is your friend. Some people may call you a straight shooting chum and call you a wonderful guy. But the man in the glass says you're only a bum if you can't look him straight in the eye. You may fool the whole world on the pathway of life and get pats on your back as you pass. But your final reward will be heartaches and tears if you cheated the man in the glass. I cheated myself for a long time, both in and out of the programs. Okay, I don't cheat myself anymore. I as the opening introduction said, I got 5 kids, I got 9 grandkids. I'm overpaid. I'm blessed. I was supposed to be at that men's retreat 3 times ago. I was leaving a rehab and I had an anaphylactic shock, and my whole throat and everything closed up, and it got really bad, and they had to life flight me by helicopter to Syracuse, New York, to St. Joseph's Medical Center, and I was intubated in ICU for 13 days. They OD'd me on fentanyl. I died 4 times. They had to bring me back, and it was really, really bad. And that's when I was supposed to go. And Sean, one of the guys down there, and Dave Gibbs, and they said I wasn't supposed to die to get out of the commitment. And so I said I'll be there next year. And so then last year, I'm supposed to go, and everything's all set. And I brought a few guys from New York, and you guys all got wiped out with the rains and the floods and stuff, and so it all got canceled at the last minute that week of it. And so I went anyway. I took the guys. We went to Tennessee, and we went down. We ended up going to Dollywood and Hershey Park, and we just had a great time. Went to Dr. Bob's, went to Akron. It was fun. And then this time I made it, okay, and you didn't, okay, but it was a lot of fun. A bunch of great guys, and that's the thing, is the singleness of purpose and that primary purpose. We're trying to help each other, and that's really what these programs are about, is people helping people. And it's really for, I'll just say it like this, I was very weak, and it was for weak people to lean on weak people till we're strong enough to stand on our own. And when we get to stand on our own, how we keep it is giving it back away. It's a dichotomy that we really don't understand, and yet that's what works. And it's really been a privilege and an honor to be here with you. I loved it in that bio, because those were a lot of the good things that I've done in life, because I've had a lot of good things too. You know what I mean? And done a lot of good. We tend to focus on the bad, but as in anything, we have good and bad, and that's that. I want to say this too. That's a mistake people make about the 4th step. They think that it's such a scary step, right? And did a fearless and thorough moral inventory. They think that it's an amoral inventory, that it's all the bad stuff. But it's not. It's a moral inventory. We have good, we have bad, like in everybody. Okay, and it's just getting to know the good traits and the bad traits, the things we're good in, the things we're not good at, and to unmask that stuff so that we can become usefully and happily whole as people. Okay, and that's in all walks of life. And I don't care if you're a man, you're a woman. Feelings and emotions are basically the same. It's how we deal with them and how we express them. And I'm glad that I'm here.
Well, I am certainly glad you are here. I feel like I got the best end of the stick because I got Scott one-on-one when everyone else had to hear him as a group. But no, I am truly honored, Scott, and grateful. And your story is just unbelievable and filled with hope, And one of the things you talked about was, how we God likes to work with empty vessels. You talked about your cup, and I always think,
Yeah.
The 3 big religions, Islam and Christianity and Judaism all talk about an empty cup and God filling that cup somewhere in their stories. So it's like it's just amazing. So thank you for sharing. But I can't let you go without doing our rapid fire questions, Scott. And
Okay.
I know at all you've been through, this is probably the most pressure you can imagine being under.
Okay. This is great.
All right, sir. So what
Hey,
is your favorite?
Wait,
Yeah.
Joe. You're laughing,
Yeah.
but one of my favorite parts of the book is where it says outsiders are sometimes shocked when we burst into merriment over seemingly tragic experiences out of our past. But why shouldn't we laugh? We have recovered and been given the power to help others. So we think laughter has its usefulness. I love that part. My sponsor used to drill that into me. It's okay to laugh.
Yeah, I think it's important. I really do. And so thank you. Thank you for that. Because that's important for people to know too, that it is
Yep.
okay to laugh, you know. All right, Scott, here we
Okay.
go. What is your favorite recovery slogan?
First things first.
What is your least favorite recovery slogan?
Hmm. Think.
What do you think is your sobriety superpower?
Honesty.
If you could say one thing to your former self, what would it be?
Knock it off. Grow up.
What song do you play to lift your spirits when you need a boost?
AC/DC. Back in Black. Yeah.
If you could grant yourself one wish to help with your recovery, what would it be?
Wisdom.
What step do you love the most?
Hmm. 10.
What step do you love the least?
God, I like them all. Ooh. Probably. I really don't. I like them all. If I had to not like one of them, it would be from my experience, it would have to be the 6th step. Yeah.
Fair enough.
Is it because I like to hold on to some of those defects of character?
You're not alone there.
Yeah.
What is one of your favorite movies?
Polar Express.
And finally, if heaven exists, what would you like to hear God say when you arrive at the pearly gates?
Ha ha.
Classic, Scott. Classic. Thank you so much, Scott, for being on the show and for sharing your amazing story, man. I really appreciate it.
Thanks, Joe. I love you guys. And anybody listening, I just want you to tell you that you can do it too. Okay? You can.
Absolutely.
There is hope. Don't give up. That stick-to-itiveness and the persistence. Just keep trying. Don't give up. As long as you're breathing in, there's hope. And today is the day we stay sober. That's all it is. And you just drill that into your brain. Today's the day I stay sober. That's it.
Yeah. Well said, Scott. Thank you so much.
Thank you.
And for the rest of you guys out there, please subscribe to our friends at thedailyponderables.com, your recovery source for inspiration and encouragement every day. A new episode of The Cup of Joe Show is released every Thursday at noon. Visit thecupofjoeshow.net, or you can listen to the show on your favorite podcast apps: Podbean, Apple, Spotify, YouTube, and others. Just search for The Cup of Joe Show. Don't forget the. Like, follow, subscribe, and share, because someone out there needs to hear this today. Have an amazing day, everyone.
It's just a laid-back vibe, baby.
We hope you enjoyed today's Experience, Strength, and Hope. We are so grateful you decided to join us. Please share this episode with someone who might need it. Also, don't forget to like and subscribe. Remember, no matter where you are in your recovery journey, you are not alone. Reach up and reach out to someone. Please do not suffer in silence. Until next time, let's take it 1 minute, 1 hour, and 1 day at a time. Thanks for listening to the Cup of Joe Show.